Coming up on New Day at Arirang. Washington calls Seoul a close ally who shares common issues with NATO member countries, as President Yoon is set to attend the NATO summit next week in Madrid to bolster solidarity and discuss North Korea's nuclear issue. While there, a trilateral summit between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo is expected to take place. South Korea has confirmed its first monkeypox case in a South Korean national who arrived in the country after visiting Germany. In response, President Yoon called for strict quarantine measures for overseas arrivals and ordered health authorities to secure a swift supply of vaccines and antiviral drugs. A powerful earthquake in eastern Afghanistan has killed at least 1,000 people and injured another 1,500. It's the deadliest quake to hit the country in 2 decades.
Hello and welcome to New Day at Arirang. It's Thursday, June 23rd, 8 a.m. here in Seoul, South Korea. I'm Woo Seong.
And I'm Lee Jun-seok. Thanks for joining us this morning, because over the next hour, we'll be giving you a look at some of the biggest headlines of the day and experts' insights on key issues facing Korea and the rest of the world. Now, our top story this morning. Next week, President Yoon will attend a NATO summit to bolster solidarity and discuss North Korea's nuclear issue.
A trilateral summit between the leaders of Seoul, Washington and Tokyo is expected to take place. But a one-on-one summit between Yoon and his Japanese counterpart is unlikely, according to our Yoon Jung-min, who files us this report.
South Korea will establish a diplomatic mission to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in Brussels in time for President Yoon-seok's visit to Madrid next week to participate in the NATO summit. That's according to the president's national security advisor Kim Sung-han on Wednesday, where he also laid out what President Yoon aims to achieve at the multilateral summit as the very first South Korean head of state to attend a NATO meeting.
President Yoon will strengthen value-based solidarity rooted in liberal democracy with 30 NATO allies and partners at the NATO summit. We expect to garner broad support from the participants by making clear our stance on North Korea's nuclear and related issues at the summit.
South Korea is invited to the meeting this year as one of the 4 partners in the Asia-Pacific, along with Australia, Japan, and New Zealand. On the sidelines of the multilateral summit, President Yoon will likely hold a trilateral with his U.S. and Japanese counterparts Joe Biden and Fumio Kishida. Seoul's top office said coordination is currently underway for some 10 bilateral meetings, but hinted that a Yoon-Kishida one-on-one is less likely as ties between the two countries remain frosty over historical issues and as Japan has a House of Councilors elections coming up. At the multilateral, South Korea plans to establish a security network with NATO and boost its humanitarian assistance to Ukraine, as Russia's invasion of Ukraine will most likely top the multilateral summit table.
President Yoon will establish a comprehensive security network with NATO allies amid unpredictable international situations, such as the Ukraine crisis. As South Korea is not a member of the NATO, we seek a comprehensive security cooperation with NATO, not a collective defense.
It's in line with this goal that Seoul plans to open a mission to NATO for more active communication, cooperation on nuclear energy and chips, as well as coordination on emerging security challenges in cyberspace, aerospace, climate change, and more. President Yoon plans to take his debut on the multilateral summit stage to boost the nation's diplomatic ties with other countries that share common values and up its contribution in the international arena. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price called South Korea an important ally in relation to President Yoon-seok's participation at the NATO summit in Madrid next week. The remarks come as Price was asked what role Washington expects Seoul to play despite not being a member of NATO. He said that while NATO is a defense alliance, South Korea faces similar challenges, noting Russia, China and security as common issues. South Korea is among the 4 non-member countries from the Asia-Pacific region to be invited, including Australia, New Zealand and Japan. The U.S. State Department has published its Integrated Country Strategy, a document that articulates the U.S.'s priorities in other nations. Strengthening the South Korea-U.S. alliance and achieving the denuclearization of North Korea are both on the list. Our Kim Dami has this report.
pursuing the complete denuclearization of North Korea through a robust South Korea-U.S. alliance, as well as the UN sanctions on the regime, has once again topped Washington's foreign policy agenda. In its Integrated Country Strategies program approved on April 25th, the State Department drafted a 4-year strategic plan for 4 major tasks to be carried out by the U.S. Embassy in South Korea. The plan includes reducing threats posed by the reclusive state while pursuing the resumption of substantive dialogue with Pyongyang. To sustain an effective combined defense, the Biden administration will also ensure implementation of the Defense Burden Sharing Special Measures Agreement. Trilateral security cooperation with Seoul and Tokyo is also being made a critical component of collective security against Pyongyang. In fact, it's believed that the trilateral coordination will serve as, quote, a force for protecting shared values against an aggressive China. The State Department categorized building on a solid foundation of economic and people-to-people ties as its second most urgent mission, noting the goal will foster mutual prosperity and economic security, including securing supply chains. The 18-page-long document further prioritized Seoul's ability to mitigate and respond to non-traditional security threats such as climate change and cyber attacks. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
U.S. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell said the central bank is, quote, strongly committed to bringing down inflation. Addressing the Senate Banking Committee on Wednesday, Powell added that the Fed has the ability to make that happen. He reiterated that the ongoing rate hikes would be appropriate, adding that the exact pace would depend on the country's economic outlook. Nevertheless, he noted economic conditions are generally favorable, with a strong labor market and persistently high demand. Now, in response to soaring U.S. energy prices, President Joe Biden has called for a 3-month suspension of America's national gasoline tax. Addressing the nation from the White House, Biden highlighted that the move will give families some relief by bringing down the price of gas. However, he noted that this alone will not fix the problem. This comes as Biden is reportedly considering scrapping Trump-era tariffs on a range of Chinese goods to curb inflation. Citing sources, Reuters reported that a decision is unlikely before next week's G7 summit.
South Korea's Producer Price Index, a key barometer of future inflation, rose to an all-time high last month. The Bank of Korea says that the index came to 119.24, up 5% from April, rising for a 5th month in a row month-on-month. And compared to the same period last year, it's a jump of nearly 10%, marking the 18th straight on-year increase. Livestock products saw especially high rises. Pork was up by almost 22% and eggs nearly 5% last month compared to April. The central bank attributed the rise to soaring global energy and commodity prices due to the war in Ukraine and supply chain disruptions. President Yoon pledged to revive the local nuclear power industry as a source of clean energy and economic growth. Now, the first step involves supporting companies impacted by the previous administration's nuclear phase-out policy. The government will also help them enter the global market. Lee Jun-seok has the details.
On Wednesday, President Yoon inspected a factory run by Doosan Enerbility, South Korea's only factory that makes the main components of nuclear reactors. There in Changwon, South Korea's hub for nuclear power, he underscored his commitment to reversing the nuclear phase-out policy put in place in 2017 under the previous administration.
우리 원전은 세계 최고 수준의 기술력과 또 안전성을 인정받고 있습니다. 더 키워나가야 될 이 원전 산업이 지금 수년간 어려움에 직면해 있어서 매우 안타깝고 지금이라도 바로 잡아야 할 것입니다.
Highlighting the ability of domestic companies to complete projects on time and on budget, the president expressed hope for South Korea to lead the global market.
지금 세계는 이 원전 수출 시장의 문이 활짝 열려 있습니다. 만일 우리가 지난 5년 동안 바보 같은 짓을 안 하고 이 원전 생태계를 더욱 탄탄히 구축했더라면은 지금 아마 경쟁자가 전혀 없었을 것이라고 저는 확신합니다.
To make that a reality, the president vowed to get the industry back on track first by helping companies stripped of contracts due to the nuclear phase-out initiative. The plan is to immediately place orders worth some $70 million. They will include resuming the construction at the Shinano nuclear reactors, units 3 and 4, then increasing the total amount of orders to some $770 million by 2025. The government will also provide assistance for R&D and help for small and mid-sized companies looking to grow. In the meantime, it will also serve as an active global salesperson. The government will first try winning deals in countries like the Czech Republic and Poland, which Industry Minister Lee Chang-yang himself will soon be visiting. The ultimate goal is to export 10 nuclear reactors by 2030. A special public-private partnership will be launched next month and put in charge of related affairs. 이경은, Arirang News.
South Korea confirmed its first case of monkeypox from a South Korean national who visited Germany. With the latest case, the health authorities raised the risk level from attention to the second level caution. Lee Dae-yeon brings us the updates.
South Korea is no longer a safe haven from monkeypox. The Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency confirmed the country's first case of monkeypox on Wednesday. It said there were 2 suspected cases, one Korean citizen and a foreign national. The Korean citizen tested positive after showing symptoms such as fever, sore throat, and fatigue upon entering the country from Germany on Tuesday afternoon at around 4 p.m. It has been reported that the person also suffered headaches 3 days before arrival and are currently receiving treatment at Incheon Medical Center west of Seoul. Meanwhile, another suspected case was a foreign national who entered the country on Monday. Symptoms such as a sore throat and skin lesion has begun to show the day before. The foreign national, however, tested negative. South Korea has now raised the monkeypox risk level from attention to the second level caution, which requires confirmed cases to go into self-isolation. Authorities also mentioned plans for antiviral medications.
There are plans to import the antiviral drug tecovirimat for 500 people in mid-July, but until then, any medication available for treatment will be distributed.
President Yoon has called for strict quarantine measures for overseas arrivals and ordered health authorities to secure a swift supply of vaccines and antiviral drugs. With monkeypox spreading around the World Health Organization plans to hold an emergency meeting on Thursday to determine whether monkeypox is an emergency of international concern. Lee Dae-yeon, Arirang News.
The People Power Party's Independent Ethics Committee has postponed making a decision on disciplinary action against the party's chairman Lee Jun-seok over sexual bribery allegations and an attempt to cover the case. Now, following a marathon discussion on Wednesday, members agreed to reconvene on July 7th to hear the chairman's explanation and come to a final conclusion. However, the committee did decide to punish Lee's close ally Kim Cheol-gun for allegedly destroying evidence related to the scandal. Chairman Lee, who denies the allegations, expressed regret over the delayed decision, saying it'll only fuel chaos within the party for an extended period. Any disciplinary action, even the lightest warning, is expected to be a blow to Lee's political career and perhaps to the party as a whole.
It's now time for Onpoint, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into some of the key issues in the spotlight right now. Well, many are expecting a recession to hit the U.S. economy, which could certainly mean a ripple effect for economies all around the world.
That's right. So how bad is the situation in the U.S., and is there any chance the world's biggest economy can avoid the worst? Well, to get a look at the U.S. economy right now, we turn to Renee Bowen, professor of economics at the University of California, San Diego School of Global Policy and Strategy. Good morning to you, Professor.
Good morning. How are you?
We're doing okay. Well, I'm hoping the U.S. economy is also doing well as well. But there are some pessimists as well. A number of economists certainly predicting a recession to hit the U.S. What are your thoughts on this, and how likely is a recession there?
Right. So, the typical definition of a recession is 2 quarters of negative GDP growth. And in the last release from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, we saw that there was a downturn in GDP, so negative growth in GDP. So the question is, will we continue to see that negative growth in GDP? And obviously, it's going to depend on a number of factors. It's going to depend on what the Fed decides to do about interest rates going forward. It also depends on what the administration decides to do about spending. But then there are other factors sort of beyond their control, including supply and demand shifters, including what's happening in the Ukraine and Russia, and what happens to supply chains and trade in general.
And Professor Bowen, the last time the US slipped into recession was in December of 2007, which lasted until June 2009. And well, how does the build-up to that recession really compare with the situation that the US is seeing right now?
Right. So there isn't a whole lot that can be compared to the current situation. We are coming out of the COVID dip, if you would. Many economists thought that there may have been a more prolonged recession going into COVID and coming out of COVID. We didn't see that happen. We saw a very strong recovery coming out of COVID. The challenge is that the recovery was very uneven. So we saw top income groups experiencing a rebound in income and recovery of income to pre and above pre-COVID levels. But at the bottom end of the income distribution, we're seeing a downturn that's persisting. So this sort of bifurcated recovery is quite unlike what we saw in 2007. The growth in the economy just after COVID really defied expectations, and it was largely because of that bifurcated economy. And so we have to keep an eye on that going forward.
Now, Professor, we do have some optimists who believe that the U.S. could actually avoid a recession, which would be fantastic. But what factors would actually allow for that to happen?
So the growth that has been driving the recent upturn in GDP is really driven by fundamentals. There have been improvements in technology. There have been a strong growth in demand for autos. And that's, again, being driven by strong growth in incomes at the upper end of the income distribution. And that's likely to continue. So the challenge is how to maintain that strong growth in income without jeopardizing investments too much. So the Fed has, of course, raised interest rates more than it had intended to, 75 basis points. But it will have to signal more certainty about what it's going to do in the future. The name of the game right now is certainty and stability. So as long as the Fed can create that certainty and stability for markets, they know how to perform. But if it seems that the Fed and the administration really is starting to lose control to some extent of the economy, that's when markets will really get worried, and we're likely to see a deeper recession.
Well, one of the biggest factors leading to the huge slowdown in economic growth for the US is the massive inflation that the country is seeing right now. And with the US Fed having increased its benchmark key rates by 75 basis points and there being even more rate hikes ahead, do you think it's going to be enough to quell the inflation? And if so, how much longer do you think we'll have to wait until we see the effects of that?
Right. So that's clearly going to cool down the economy to some extent. The drivers of inflation lately have been housing prices as well as food prices. And food prices clearly due to what's happening with Russia and the Ukraine. And that is not likely to abate very soon. Although what's the good news there is that governments are very much aware of it. And even the World Trade Organization is taking note. And there are attempts to coordinate on food supplies to help mitigate whatever price increases are being driven by the situation in Ukraine and Russia. The other part of it is housing prices, and the increase in interest rates are going to have a major effect on housing prices, and we've already seen this. So that part of inflation is likely to come down. But again, the thing to watch is this economy where at the top, incomes are still strong and can drive higher prices, even though at the bottom, you're going to see a slowdown in spending.
Certainly very similar to the situation that we're seeing here in South Korea. But Professor, again, thank you very much for your insights today, and really looking forward to speaking to you again in the future. All right, then, that's going to wrap up the first half of New Day at Arirang.
But don't go away. Coming up next in the second half, well, today marks 130 years of bilateral trade ties between Korea and Austria. And we're going to take a look at how the two countries have been prospering under their trade ties, all during Global Insights. So don't go anywhere. We'll be back in just a moment.
Share South Korea's experience in tackling COVID-19 and introduce a Korean New Day. A Korean survivor of Japan's wartime slavery met with
extraordinary climate crisis and pledged to work with the EU to tackle the challenge.
The objective of its North Korea policy is
protesters gathering across the country to peacefully demand an end to hate and violence.
Arirang, what matters?
넌 볼 수 없고 가질 수 없어 뚝뚝 힘을 쏟아내도 뜨거운 자태 한번 비추지 않고 내게만 가치란 그녀는 유명한 서울의 별다 어딨나 In your eye 걔와 함께면 넌 디스토피아 내 발걸음 따라오면 유토피아 나의
I feel so good right now. Maybe I had a drink or two, but this somehow feels like it's forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good. But right now, maybe this is forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good. Right now, forever.
And welcome back to the second half of New Day at Arirang. Now, a powerful 5.9 magnitude quake, the deadliest one in decades, has rocked Afghanistan.
More than 1,000 people have been killed and many more wounded, but authorities believe the toll is expected to grow as the search and rescue operation continues. Our Kim Hyo-sun has the details.
The death toll from an earthquake in eastern Afghanistan has surpassed 1,000, while over 1,500 people have been injured. The country's disaster management officials say the toll is expected to grow as information comes in from remote villages. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, the quake hit at around 1:30 a.m. local time on Wednesday, around 44 kilometers from the city of Khost, located near the Pakistani border. As helicopters landed in the area to rescue people, residents recounted the moment disaster hit.
It was about midnight when the quake struck. It destroyed the houses of our neighbors. When we arrived, there were many dead and wounded. They sent us to the hospital. I also saw many dead bodies.
As rescue work continues in the region, a UN official says lack of access and communication could pose the biggest challenge.
And so having a humanitarian operation put in place is going to be immediately challenged by the lack of easy access to the area, to the region. And I think that's going to be probably one of the big challenges.
Another UN envoy estimates that over 2,000 homes have been destroyed by the quake and noted that in some cases, several families were living in a single house. This means the actual toll could be even higher than what has been reported so far. The earthquake comes at a time when people are already leading difficult lives in the country amid a humanitarian disaster made worse by the Taliban takeover in August 2021. Kim Hye-sun, Arirang News.
Now, flying a fighter jet requires extremely specialized and intense training. Now, some of the most challenging phases for pilots include preparing the body for the intense G-forces and the lack of oxygen. Bae-eun-ji went through some of the grueling steps to sample what the aces in the sky endure every day.
At the Special Training Center in South Korea, pilots in the military receive a special type of training to cope with huge centrifugal forces while flying at high speeds. To find out what this actually feels like, I went through high-G training.
In order to pass this test, I need to withstand 6 times the force of gravity for 20 seconds inside this cockpit. Let's see if I can pass the test and not pass out.
I made it through the warm-up where I was put through 4G, or 4 times the force of gravity. The force was raised gradually at 0.1 G per second while I practiced a special type of breathing technique they taught us. But during the actual test, the force was raised by 1 G per second all the way up to 6 G. I lasted for just 2 seconds before losing consciousness. This is because the extra force caused blood to rush to my feet, and my heart couldn't pump hard enough to bring this heavier blood to the brain. At the training center, I also went through ejection training, aimed at preventing serious injury when pilots are ejected from a fighter jet. Pilots learn how to position themselves before pulling the handle. This is essential for survival, as the ejection process subjects pilots to forces as much as 20 times that of gravity. Fighter pilots also go through hypoxia training, where they learn how to withstand low oxygen environments while flying at high altitudes. During the training, we first breathed in 100% oxygen for 15 minutes, before the simulation chamber reached 25,000 feet. We took off our masks for about 3 minutes and tried to solve simple math problems. After about a minute, I felt very dizzy, like many other people sitting next to me. And it became extremely difficult to work through those simple problems because of mental confusion caused by a lack of oxygen. Pilots are required to go through all of these training exercises regularly.
All pilots in our Air Force are trained every 3 years at this training center. This regular training can help prevent accidents that can occur during an actual flight.
배은지, 아리랑 뉴스, 청주.
It's now time for Global Insights, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. Now, South Korea and Austria celebrate 130 years of trade ties on Thursday. Bilateral trade relations stretch back to 1892 during Korea's Joseon dynasty and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Now, the two monarchies were divided, of course, and they ceased to exist in the post-war era, but new diplomatic ties were established between South Korea and Austria in 1963, and a trade treaty was signed 8 years later. Since then, bilateral trade has been growing steadily, turning into a strategic partnership just last year. Today, we discuss this historic milestone and what lies ahead for the two countries, particularly during this time when the world has suffered years of sluggish growth, rising protectionism, topped with geopolitical conflict, supply chain disturbances, and of course the COVID-19 pandemic. So for this discussion, we have in the studio today Wolfgang Köstinger, Austrian Trade Commissioner and Commercial Counsellor at Advantage Austria Seoul. very warm welcome to you, Mr. Kostinger.
Thank you for having me.
Thank
Good
you
morning.
so much for joining us this morning. And well, it's quite a historic milestone, especially for a modern state like South Korea, which was divided in the mid-20th century, of course. And of course, our trade relations have come through leaps and bounds. But what is the status of South Korea and Austria's trade relations today in 2022?
Well, the trade relations between Austria and Korea, they have developed very well during the last years. And in 2021, exports grow by more than 13%. After a minor setback due to the pandemic, the trade volume has already surpassed the volume of 2018. And in addition, now that traveling is possible again, we see a steady increase in business travels. For example, in late May, a delegation of the Tyrol branch of the Federation of Austria visited Korea to explore new fields of cooperation. And then less than 2 weeks ago, Advantage Austria had a pavilion at the Seoul Food Fair with 11 Austrian companies that participated. And the sector which has experienced the most remarkable growth in terms of exports was the automotive sector. But there's also been a steady increase in chemicals, pharmaceuticals, and machinery for the railway sector.
Right, very diverse industries we're talking about here. And it's been quite encouraging, really, because during this prolonged slump in global trade, it's quite obvious that South Korean and Austrian businesses are finding potential business opportunities together, opportunities for collaboration. But there are already a number of Austrian businesses established here in South Korea, I believe. What are some brands or Austrian businesses here in the country?
Well, the most famous and well-known Austrian consumer brands in Korea are obviously Swarovski and Red Bull, although not everyone in Korea might be aware that these are Austrian brands. But then again, when you see a BMW 5 Series or a Mercedes G-Class in the streets of Seoul, they have been produced in Austria, in Graz, the second city of Austria. Then when you go skiing in one of Korea's ski resorts, there is a high chance that you use a cable car made by the Austrian manufacturer Doppelmayr, for example. But where Austrian companies really excel is in the B2B business. These companies are not that well known to the wider public. We used to call them hidden champions. Most of them are in the realm of high tech, in particularly mechanical engineering, metal manufacturing and electronics. And there are roughly 200 of those hidden Austrian champions, and some of them even with production site in Korea and also in fields where you would not expect it. There is one that produces damper systems for the shipbuilding industry. Another one produces printed circuit boards for special applications like hearing devices or cochlear implants. And another company specialized on software for autonomous driving.
Right, they are hidden champions indeed, even here in South Korea. We simply cannot do without them, although they might not be so conspicuous. But, well, you have 100 offices. Advantage Austria has 100 offices in over 70 countries, and obviously Seoul is one of them. So what makes the South Korean market really attractive for Austrian businesses?
Yeah, well, it's correct. Our organization, Advantage Austria, has around 100 offices worldwide, and Advantage Austria offices are in every major city in Asia. Our office here in Seoul exists for more than 45 years, and South Korea is the third biggest market for Austrian companies in Asia. Well, shortly after China and Japan. Austrian companies appreciate the solution-driven mindset of Korean business partners, the speed, the fastness, and the will of getting things done. Very stable and sound economic environment is also very helpful for Austrian businesses here. And on the other hand, Korean consumers, they really value high-quality products, excellent services, and reliability, and these are all qualities that Austrian companies can offer. So Austria and Korea, it's a perfect match.
Right, and well, as for South Korea, we've seen some unicorns in the business-to-consumer market, but there's something of a slump in the B2B market. So how can Austria and South Korea really come together in that regard? What kind of solutions do you think they could adopt here?
Well, there's a lot that Austrian companies can offer in terms of advanced technologies in green tech, including renewable energy production, circular economies, recycling, wastewater treatment, filtering. Austria itself has set the ambitious goal to achieve carbon neutrality already by 2040. One example of Austrian expertise already present in Korea is the production of electric power with biomass. Furthermore, many of the hydroelectric power plants here in South Korea do work with Austrian turbines. And there is an Austrian company, for example, also that is providing quite recently monitoring systems for water quality for some Korean municipalities as well.
Right, and these are some key technologies and moving forward towards sustainability and carbon neutrality, of course. And well, in terms of doing that, developing new emerging technologies and really adapting to the changing conditions of our world today. Seoul and Vienna, they signed a new agreement in 2019, agreeing to broaden science and tech exchanges between the two countries. So what are some areas that you see the highest potential for that kind of collaboration to happen?
Well, I see a big potential for synergy in materials research, in 5G and later on in 6G networks, in Internet of Things, in autonomous driving, especially in the field of autonomous driving. There's already some collaboration going on between Austrian and Korean companies, and energy storage systems like solid-state batteries would be a great field for joint research. And obviously, it will be essential to work together on renewable energies and technologies to mitigate climate change.
Right, and for both economies, manufacturing is a huge part of the economic composition there in both markets. And while the health of small and medium businesses, that's very important, and their startups need to be encouraged and innovation needs to happen. So in regards of doing that, you have the GoSEOUL program, which helps Austrian businesses make inroads into the South Korean market. So what benefits does your program offer, and what are you looking forward to in seeing from this year's lineup?
Yeah, well, the GoSEOUL program already exists since 2018. Actually, I have to mention that Austrian economy is very much based on small and medium-sized enterprises, also on startups, and these companies are very flexible and they can very quickly adapt to market changes. Well, as I said, we started successfully in 2018. In 2020, we had to do the event for obvious reasons virtually. And in November 2021, we already had a group of 7 Austrian startups. It's a one-week accelerator program for Austrian later stage startups that aim to internationalize towards the Korean market. We have an excellent collaboration with our Korean partners like DCamp, like KISET, the Korean Institute of Startup and Entrepreneurship Development, and of course KOTRA. And end of September this year, we're going to have another group of 7 Austrian startups who will have the chance to gather an insight of Korea's impressive innovation culture. These companies will also have B2B meetings with potential Korean partner companies. And some of the participants of previous GoSEOUL editions, they were so successful that they were able to set up a branch office and their own business here in Korea. And we are very confident that in the next edition of the GoSEOUL program, there will be some of the Austrian companies who have come to stay.
Sure, and well, currently, the trade between the two countries it is rather focused on the technical side of things, machinery, auto parts, automobiles. So do you see any room for more cultural exchanges and content being exported and imported between the two countries?
Definitely, and as you've kindly mentioned in the beginning, we are celebrating this year 130 years anniversary of relations between our two countries. And therefore, we're going to have a number of cultural events in autumn this year. For example, the Museum of Fine Arts of Vienna will showcase a huge exhibition of their world-famous paintings at the Seoul National Museum. Inauguration will take place by the end of October. Then world-renowned orchestras like Viennese Philharmonics, Viennese Symphonic Orchestra, Bruckner Orchestra are going to have concerts in Korea's major concert halls. And on the other hand, there are also many Korean music students, violinists, pianists who study at Austrian conservatories and also music schools. And now, as the travel restrictions have eased, we're also going to see a lot more Korean tourists who really appreciate Austrian cities like Vienna, Salzburg, Innsbruck, and not only enjoy the beautiful landscapes and the museums, but also, for example, attending concerts in our music halls.
Well, my mother, being a pianist, might be the first on that flight to your country to really appreciate the musical scene there. And well, there have been various milestones throughout South Korea and Austria's trade relations, of course, stretching back 130 years from this very day. And well, in terms of moving that relationship forward, what are some priority goals or projects that you have as Trade Commissioner?
Well, as Austrian Trade Commissioner, my key goals are to have even more Austrian companies in the fields of green technologies and renewable energies in Korea. Austria is the world market leader in plastic recycling plants, in glass recycling plants, in mobile processing plants for building waste. Austrian companies are global players in water treatment, in water quality monitoring, and in renewable energies like hydropower and biomass. So it's my goal to further increase Austrian technology in South Korea in these fields of green technologies and for the protection of our environment. To achieve this, our Office of Advantage Austria is going to organize a whole range of events like conferences, business missions, technical seminars. But we will also organize incoming missions for Korean stakeholders so they can visit and actually see how the whole concept and project of sustainable energy and circular economy works in Austria.
Right, a lot of exciting projects coming up and a lot of room for future collaboration between South Korea and Austria. Well, thank you very much, Wolfgang Köstinger, Trade Commissioner at
Thank you so much
Austria.
for having me.
It was wonderful having you in our studio, and yeah, thank you so much for coming in.
Yeah, thank you so much. 감사합니다.
감사합니다.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has traveled to Turkey for the first time in years to hold talks with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. The move comes as both sides try to normalize trade relations following the 2018 murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi in Saudi Arabia's Istanbul consulate. Following a summit between the leaders on Wednesday, a joint statement was issued highlighting cooperation in bilateral relations. Restrictions on trade, flights, and TV programs were also lifted, alongside a halt on mutual negative media coverage. This comes as Turkey is facing its worst economic crisis in years, and Saudi Arabia is using its wealth to build alliances in the region. Bulgaria's government has collapsed after only 6 months in power, following a vote of no confidence by lawmakers. The vote against Prime Minister Kirill Petkov means that unless he can propose an alternative government, Bulgaria will face its fourth general election since April 2021. The no-confidence vote was made with 123 in favor and 116 opposed. It comes after the ruling coalition lost its majority over disputes about the budget and North Macedonia's bid to join the EU. Petkov has had a pro-European and pro-NATO stance following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, while Bulgaria has strong historical ties with Moscow. Moscow has officially changed the address of the U.S. embassy in the Russian capital. According to city authorities on Wednesday, the street where the U.S. facility is located is now Donetsk People's Republic Square, a reference to pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine. The name was chosen by an online poll that started in mid-May and follows similar renaming strategies in European cities, where streets outside Russian embassies have been changed to names of Ukrainian heroes. Russia says one of the reasons it sent its troops into Ukraine was to protect Russian speakers from persecution in separatist regions, as it recognizes the independence of the self-declared Donetsk and Luhansk republics in Donbass. A protest against the Dutch government's plan to curb emissions has seen thousands of farmers gather in central Netherlands. Travel to the demonstration's location in the agricultural village of Stro on Wednesday saw farmers use their tractors to slow traffic on major highways. The protest comes amid new targets to limit nitrogen oxide and ammonia levels associated with high-concentration livestock farming. But farmers claim the mandates will negatively impact those working in the agricultural sector and will likely see some farmers reduce livestock numbers or get rid of them altogether. The new mandates require a 70% reduction near some protected nature areas, going as high as 95% in other locations. More than 200,000 festival goers have poured into the UK's southwestern county of Somerset since Wednesday to attend the Glastonbury Music Festival. It's the first time in 3 years that the event has taken place after it was postponed twice due to the pandemic. Taking place at Worthy Farm from June 22nd to June 26th, the festival will see performances from 80 artists, including Billie Eilish, Sir Paul McCartney and Kendrick Lamar. Festival goers have faced complications reaching Glastonbury due to the UK's biggest rail strike in 30 years. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good morning. Well, monsoon season starts in inland regions today. Keep an umbrella handy. It's forecast to rain heavily in central regions from the afternoon into tonight, while rain will pour down in southern provinces from tonight. And as for here in Seoul, it could see downpours during the evening commute. Monsoon rain brings heat relief. Seoul will see highs in the mid-20s today, but heat alerts in Daewon parts of Gyeongsang-Pukto province remain in place with temperatures still above 30 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Morning lows are slightly higher than the same time yesterday, and Gwangju seemed to have a very warm night. And expect to see highs going 2 to 5 degrees lower than yesterday. Daejeon will be at 29 degrees, but Gyeongju is still blistering hot at 33 degrees Celsius. More monsoon rain is in the forecast over the weekend in southern parts of the country, and wet, dark, and humid conditions stay through the end of June. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
Well, it looks like we're going to have some rain, finally.
Yeah, I mean, all that extended drought that we're talking about. My grandmother was telling me she's farms rice, and she wasn't even able to start her farming, which was supposed to begin in May. So, yeah, all that rain that we were hoping. Finally, not a big fan of monsoon season personally,
Definitely
but
not.
certainly need that rain and the precipitation, right?
A boon for farmers, terrible for my hair, but oh well, that's how the weather is.
That's right.
That wraps up our newscast for this hour, but we will be back tomorrow for our Friday's edition of New Day Arirang.
Thanks as always for tuning in, but do stick around for more updates in our later newscasts. Have a great rest of your day wherever you are, and as always, take care.